Welcome to today's session on the Future of Work 2.0. I couldn't be more excited to be having this conversation today, and I'm particularly thrilled about the great panelists we've got to enter into the dialogue. And it's interesting because the people who are joining today literally have future of work in their job or even in their job title. So let me introduce you to who will be sharing the discussion with me today. Today we've got Christian Schmeichel, SVP and Chief Future Work Officer at SAP, Patrick or Paddy Hull, VP Global Learning and Future of Work Expert at Unilever, and Taspawi Chandeli, Global Vice President of Talent and Development at the Coca-Cola Company. Welcome and thank you for discussing this topic today. I know we're going to dive into how has this pandemic period changed our thinking on the future of work? What are some of the learnings? What are some of the trends around the corner? And how can we better prepare for the future of work? And what a wonderful time to be having this conversation today, because we have an abundance of thinking around the trends that are impacting working and the workplace, some revolutionary new ideas, and some thinking about what does it mean to really be a responsible employer? So whether you're looking at Mercer's Global Talent Trends, that's talking about the rise of the relatable organization, work by my colleague Ravan Jathuthasan and his co-author John Boudreau on work without jobs. Again, new thinking about how things might be different in the future, or indeed the work that the World Economic Forum released at Davos just a few weeks ago on the new work standards that have emerged out of this period. We're not short of ideas, but putting them into practice, I think, is where we really do have some of the questions and comments. So on that note, I'm actually going to come off share and go straight into the dialogue. And I wonder, Christian, since you do have Future of Work in your title and you're now heading up the new Future of Work division at SAP, whether you wanted to kick off. I think we'd love to hear from you what's in your remit and maybe what's top of your agenda for this year.
Absolutely, Kate. Thanks very much. And great to be here today with all of you and also these interesting other panelists. I mean, you are posing the right question, right? Future of work, this is currently top of mind for all of us and for many also on the call. And when we talked about the future of work at SAP, we tried to get our heads around what is really in scope because the topic is so huge. And we started to discuss a little bit various time horizons. So we said, okay, over the last 2 years, we have all managed successfully the pandemic. But this was not future of work yet. This was a wake-up call. This was crisis management, if you will. And as we speak, we are all getting ready for the post-pandemic, hopefully rather sooner than later, keeping our fingers crossed that the pandemic is getting over soon. And while we are doing this, we are preparing, at least at SAP, for hybrid working model, which is not an easy one. And we have committed to everyone at SAP, to all of our 100,000 folks, to make sure that they can see where and when and how to work best, which is, of course, a heavy undertaking. And we're currently implementing this now across 75 countries. And this is keeping us very busy. But then, exactly. But then once we have done this, this is where we feel the future of work really starts, maybe next year or whenever. And this is where we would like to get ready for, because this is when you really do the double click on future of work. We feel it's probably 3 dimensions. The first one is the future of workforce, right? If you close your eyes, if you think about the future of your company, who is working at your company, whether it's gig workers, permanent employees, or maybe machine or AI, right? This is, I think, the key question we need to all answer. And once we have this, the second dimension comes into play, which is then the future of people practices or workplace practices. So how do you prepare then with your people agenda for this new workforce? And then, of course, ultimately, because many of us are working in the HR space, once we have a clear picture of the future of workforce, and once we have a clear understanding what we want to do on the people and workplace practices, we also need to probably evolve our own HR function, right? It's also the future of HR. And this is fun because there's so many topics, everything needs to be orchestrated, and we feel it's kind of a future of work agenda that needs to be driven. And we are all very excited to do that.
Christian, I love the fact that you find it fun, and you've thrown up a really good point here that these topics are so very much intertwined, but also the landscape is much broader than prior to the pandemic. I think all our panelists would agree that before, the future work conversation was dominated by AI, automation, how jobs would change. And now it has broadened out to looking at health and well-being and the people and how HR can best support. Fascinating, we'll come back to that. So Paswi, I wonder if you wouldn't mind diving in. We'd love to hear how you are defining the future of work at Coca-Cola Company and some of the things that are top of your agenda this year.
Yeah, no, would love to, Kate. And in fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to deep dive a little bit into what we talk about from a career standpoint, which is linked to the future of work topic. And I was just reflecting yesterday, Ravan, who you mentioned, actually joined my team meeting, and he talked about Black Swan events. And he said, you think about Black Swan events happening once in a century, but he counted off 4 that have just happened in the last 20 years. So you really can't count them as Black Swan. And so when we were coming, similar to what Christian said, as we were sort of, hobbling our way out of the pandemic, we actually wanted to step back and reflect and say, what have we actually learned about our workforce? What have we learned about what people want from their life and from their careers? And the one thing that emerged very clearly is a big humble learning that we don't have the answer for everybody, and neither should we try to. You also want to create a workplace where you can meet people where they are. You can help enable their strengths. And also not try to drive a career that is all about employment guarantee, that you have to be employed with Coca-Cola for the rest of your life. But how do we make you competitive? How do we increase your employability? And you will see that story from Unilever. You'll see that in the World Economic Forum Good Work Standards that we all put together. And we actually took that as the framework of what our careers and future of work strategy would be like. So it's all about flexibility, transparency, and choice. We are not telling anybody that this is your next step and this is the next step, etc. But we are talking about what are the kind of skills that you need to continue to stay competitive in the future. And funnily enough, and I know my esteemed colleagues on this call will agree, it's not functional. It's not like you have to learn these 4 things, but it's more about being able to operate in this dynamic world. And we have actually amplified the importance of great people management. And so what's the role of the leader in the future? And it's about moving away from being the director of tasks to being, it sounds a little bit cheesy, but to be the enabler of dreams. How do you sit down with your people? How do you have great conversations? And how do you help them craft their future in the company? And hopefully all of that takes you to your next role in Coke. But if not, and you go out and you, become the CEO of Unilever, we are very proud of you. So we, sorry, Patty, that was just a joke. But that's where we are, we want to meet people where they are. We recognize everybody's journey is unique and no 2 people are the same.
Wonderful. I'm going to come back to that talent sharing, particularly across companies. And I know you and Patty work very close together, and we're active members on the new work standards. I love that comment about enabler of dreams. It resonates with what Christian was saying about we need to orchestrate it. And I think that is really important. And this is a really inspiring time. But you're right, even from our global talent trends data, careers have changed. People felt on the one hand that their careers had stalled. And then they feel there's less clarity in the world ahead. And what I heard from you, it is if it's about flexibility, transparency, and choice, we might need to get comfortable with that lack of clarity. Yes. So really interesting. Patty, I would love to hear from you. You have also been a very active member in the World Economic Forum Good Work Alliance that has come out with that new framework. And one of the things that we talked about over the last 2 years is how the future work agenda has been reset around more human-centric values. And that ties in very much with what we talk about in global talent trends about being a relatable organization. I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. Why do organizations need to be relatable? And what does human-centric people practices actually look like day to day?
Great question, Kate. And I think Tapaswi's summarized it beautifully in that we need to be the enabler of dreams in organizations these days. And the reason for that and why we need a human-centric organization is many of our organizations were built from that industrial era, the Henry Ford sort of model, where efficiency and scale were what it's all about, and repeating the same process over and over to get maximum volume out. But the scenarios or the world we face now are all about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so an industrial era mindset of as many widgets out the door as possible does not really work, or is not sustainable in the context in which we're operating now. In fact, now organizations need to be far more nimble and agile and really creative, innovative, collaborative teaming across organizations. And that's why you need to be more human-centric, because that's what humans do, and that's what we're good at. And you know, Daniel Pink and many of us sort of read his work on what motivates people, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that's really, I guess, dream enabling, when we can help people be truly autonomous, feel empowered and accountable, develop mastery in their skills, and do purposeful work. That's when we know when we're going to have motivated people who are thriving and who are contributing that creativity, that innovation, that collaboration that organizations really need. And I think that can be truly enabled by technology rather than technology doing the opposite. And we've got the moment now to shape that. And that, I think, is what the future of work is about. I'll just give one quick example from Unilever, if I may. We have a flex platform that allows people to spend 20% of their time working on other projects. It's discretionary time, though. We don't give them extra time to do this. And we recently project on there that was not even doing work for Unilever. It was actually working for one of our partners outside Unilever on a vaccination campaign. And we thought, let's see how many people apply for this. Anyway, we had to shut down the application process within the first 8 hours because it was just exploding. We had so many people wanting to spend 20% of their discretionary time working for someone else, not even Unilever, but because it was something they were passionate about. And I think that's why human-centric organizations are so important now. That's when you can unleash people's potential when you're creating those sorts of opportunities for them.
No, I love all the language we're using around dream enabling, unleashing potential. It really is coming through the eyes of the employees, and how do we engage and inspire them. And I'm going to come back, I think, Patty, to the UWorks initiative that you have, because I think it's really interesting. So we'll spend a bit more time there. But you mentioned two things I wanted to call out. One, you talked about Daniel Pink's comments around mastery, and so did Pazwi. And I think we've gone from sort of the need to upskill and reskill to really thinking about employability. How do we keep our talent marketable? And how do we marry that learning agenda with our future work needs? I think that's really important, because certainly our research shows a bit of a disconnect on that. And I think learning for learning's sake hasn't quite delivered on all fronts. So that's a really interesting point. The other one you mentioned was how tech is our friend and will actually help us do the future of work better. We were shocked by the increase in investment in technology around people learning, people movement, so talent intelligence systems, talent marketplaces. And the number one focus for this year was actually on strategic workforce planning and strategic workforce planning technology to do some of that dynamism you were talking about, because we do need to be nimble and agile. And I think an offline exercise once a year isn't really going to deliver that. Christian, I know that you in the past have spoken around having strategic workforce planning 4.0 on your agenda this year. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what does that look like in the new world of work compared to maybe what it did before?
Absolutely, Kate. And yes, you're spot on. What we are seeing, not just in our company, but also in the market, is that this whole planning element is getting more important than ever, right? I mean, with the world around us changing at a breakneck speed, it's so important to get a better understanding what the future may look like, so that you can plan accordingly and also initiate actions accordingly. So what we are currently looking at is to get a better understanding what maybe likely scenarios may look like. And this, of course, starts with a good understanding, of course, of your current workforce. So it's about to see what is your workforce composition. Where do you have people? How many permanent employees do you have? How many gig workers? How much machine learning or AI is maybe already part of the workforce today? And maybe even more so in the future. I think that's the first step, right? To get a good understanding of the current status. And based on that, what we are currently seeing is that understanding the strategic workforce planning as the starting point to get a target picture, which would then enable anything else, is so important. And what we try to do is to drive this holistically. Yes, it's about technology, because technology will simply facilitate the process, but even more so, it's about the mindset, right? We need to embed also that strategic workforce element in the corporate planning cycle. It's about that connection to the strategy. It's about the connection to finance. And even more so, it's important to have also with HR then a seat at the table, and not just, for example, a seat once in a while, but a regular seat, because then you're really part of the planning cycle. and can also help drive the right decisions. And this means, yes, of course, having the process right. Yes, of course, having the right technology. And yes, please bear with me. I mean, at SAP, we are running SAP and using SAP. That's our bread and butter business for sure. At the same time, what I feel in the HR space, it's also important to have the right mindset and even the right people, because data is important, but you need to have the right data. And this means garbage in, garbage out. You need to understand what you need. And this also means bring maybe new people in the HR function, for example, data scientists, or maybe consultants who have a very strong data savviness. This whole element of data-driven HR will probably be much more important in the future, to have that credibility, also the conversation with the business, to make sure that we get things right. So therefore, we feel this is right now a seismic shift, and bring things now to the next level with all of that, what I just described. Data, process, technology is one, but also mindset and people to bring everything to the next level.
Fascinating. I think you're so right that data-driven HR is critical for doing future of work activities well. But I'm interested by that it is a seismic shift or a mindset change, and that premium on consulting skills is certainly, we here at Mercer as asked for some of our clients. I was also intrigued that you said, first of all, we've got to understand what we currently have and think about it through those lens of those different work models that might be in existence. You mentioned gig working, full-time, part-time, sharing, and then also what we need for the future. And I think we see organizations thinking simultaneously about, we might need to bend our demand curve or our supply curve if we're really going to solve some of those challenges. And I think part of that comes from this great resignation that we hear in the press, or the great reassessment, where people really have been asking some tough questions of themselves about what they want to do, where they want to work. And that's leading for some skills and talent shortages. Tomaso, I wonder if you could share a few words around how is this great reassessment and that adjustment in what people want influencing the future work conversations that you're having at the Coca-Cola Company?
No, Kate, I mean, it's a reality. And I think every company is experiencing it right now. And I think it's mainly, it's a little bit connected to what I already said, which is people are reassessing their ambition, they're reassessing how they want to spend time. And that's also creating the right positive pressure for organizations to create an, diverse, inclusive, enabling environment for everyone to thrive in. So a couple of things that we've started to do here at Coca-Cola. I think one is, I think every company needs to recognize this resignation is not a bad thing. It's like people who are going to chase their ambition and their dreams, they're going to go where it makes sense. And I think we need to be able to accept that. I think some organizations can take it quite sensitively. We were one of them. And we have actually worked very actively in trying to say, okay, we just need to help people be employable. We'll lose some of them in the process. But how do we make sure that we are increasing people leader and manager capability to start thinking much more proactively about talent planning? Christian spoke a little bit about it from a strategic workforce standpoint. We have institutionalized very strong talent review processes. They start from literally the top of the house and run through the organization. And so we have become very focused on what's next and what's next for our people, and creating really strong planning pools. That said, we also recognize that some of this can be, a little bit like astrology. By the time the role opens, you might have different skill requirements, different talent requirements. So we are also, working really hard to make sure we're building strong external networks. We're understanding where the talent actually exists and becoming a lot more flexible in terms of accessing it. And so one of the things I'll share with everyone listening on this call, let's not forget the lessons from the pandemic. It actually helped us access talent in different ways. And I think as we are starting to have this, offices are reopening, people are not coming back to work, they're just coming back to a workplace. Let's not lose the competitive edge that we got. And I think that's also the second thing that we've learned to do. And the third thing also is, and this is something that I do personally in my role, leading talent, I end up having a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. Just let's make sure that the great resignation doesn't turn into the great regret. People should, people should absolutely follow their dreams, but also very thoughtful about the reason why they're leaving, why they're going. Don't run away from somewhere, go towards something. And because I think the challenges that we have exist in every organization. And I'm noticing quite a few people, they make those jumps and then they come back and say, oh, well, it was not so bad. Can I find a way to come back? And those are good conversations to start having.
The loyalty of a boomerang is something we all love. Certainly
Yes.
at Mercer, we see that a lot. But I think your lesson there is very much around we need to have real and honest conversations about what jobs exist within our firm, where
Yes.
is the future going and the opportunities, and making sure that people see as a mentor outside maybe our formal roles in the organization.
Yeah,
Because
and not make false promises to just keep people, right? So people are, that cycle ends very, very quickly. And so being authentic with people and letting them know where they stand, and then making commitments come to life, I think really helps in the long term.
Hasbi, you are absolutely spot on. One of the things we do in Global Talent Trends every year is look at people who feel they're thriving in their work, careers and life, and then people who feel they're not thriving. And one of the biggest differences this year was how honest and transparent my organization had been around AI and automation, whether I would have a job or not in the future, which skills they want in the future. And it's really stark. I think in the past there's been that's actually heightened concerns about job stability in the future of work. And actually now we're not seeing that. The more honest and transparent we are, the more people are gravitating towards those firms. I love your point there about make sure that we keep that competitive edge coming out of these new ways of working. It's getting tough though, because we do see in our studies some difference of opinions between where certain pockets see the future of work being and where work essentially gets done, and what other employees are really craving. And when we look at the data about what attracts people to a firm and what keeps them in that firm, the top two are job security and flexibility. Offering both of them is pretty tough. But I do think, Patty, what you're doing with UWorks sort of reconciles some of that, where people are looking for phenomenal flexibility, but still want all the benefits of being part of an organization, part of a culture, and part of a vision. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a few words around the experiments that you've been doing around some of those new ways of working.
Yeah, sure, Kate. And I think experiments is the right word. And we really are at a tipping point in terms of workplace and workforce. And I guess that's why you're seeing more and more people with future of work in their titles, because many organizations like ourselves are trying to figure out what does the next look like. And when we're at a tipping point, then there's always going to be the naysayers and those who are saying, yep, 4-day week or whatever, let's go. And so it's actually a fascinating time to be in this space, because we do have that sort of part of us that's holding on to what we know and the way we've always worked, and then struggling to reconcile that with whether it's just simply a hybrid. As you say, there's some people saying, well, hybrid's not working, people are burning out and all of that. But I guess we need to ask ourselves as well, how much of that is still that people are trying to work in the old way, but in a hybrid fashion, so how much of that are we able to let go of the past and really embrace the future? And I think the only way we're going to do that effectively is through experiments. So UWork is one experiment that we are trialing. We gave ourselves a challenge, as you say, to say, how do we create something that marries flexibility with security? We all know that on the one hand, we have gig work and contract work that has ultimate flexibility, but really no security. Or on the other hand, we have full-time employment with lots of security, shall we say, but no flexibility. And how could we find something in the middle? So yeah, we set ourselves that challenge, and UWork is what we've come up with. I'm sure there'll be other models out there, and really keen that other organizations do try and pioneer new things so we can all learn. But UWork in essence is people, when they become a UWorker, they remain a Unilever employee. So that's very important to us. They don't become a contractor or something else. They're a Unilever employee, but they no longer have a job title because they work on contracts or gigs in Unilever. They get a guaranteed minimum retainer of a certain number of weeks each year, depends on the market. And they also get a modified package of benefits. So that's not the same as a full-time employee, but still gives them some of that security. So there's still risk for them involved because they're not getting everything that a full-time employee gets, but they are getting some security, and they're getting that flexibility to work as and when they want to, or whatever contracts they want to. Obviously, a lot of it is tied to Unilever, but they can also set up their own business, which many have done. We have new workers in our factories, top-rated technicians who are deciding to set up their own business as electricians on the side and then do some work back in our factories. We have young people who want to go and travel, and previously they would have had to have resigned from Unilever to do that, but now they can do work and travel. So it creates more options for us as a business, because effectively we get a lower cost base and more flexibility in terms of resource, and it answers that need for individuals. So I think more and more experiments like that are needed so we can feel our way into the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. And on that point around experimentation, you mentioned 4-day work week, which has been flooding the press at the moment. I know we've got an experiment in the UK with, I think, 70 companies in different industries looking at the outcome of that on engagement levels, health levels, well-being. Paddy, you mentioned there about burnout. One of the things that shocked me in Global Talent Trends this year was pre the pandemic, 67% of people said they might be at risk of burnout. Now it's 81% say, I do feel I might burn out in the 6 months. We've just never seen figures like that. So I think you're right. We haven't got this flexible working quite right. And we do need lots more experiments to rethink that. But in addition to sort of how we work, I also think that value proposition is shifting. And flexible working is no longer sort of higher up the pyramid. It's sort of at that baseline with sort of rewards and benefits. And Christian, I know you've been looking at how do we get that new value proposition right for different segments of our population. I wonder if you wanted to share some thoughts and insights on that one.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And as you have said, right, I mean, the value proposition topic is getting more and more important, because this is also how you position yourself as an employer, and also what the other esteemed panelists have already shared. I think this is currently top of mind for many companies. And this, I think it's also worthwhile to focus on this big time, because, I mean, we have all seen this in the past. In the past, it was sometimes enough to mainly focus on potentially good compensation and benefits, and maybe also career growth opportunities. But now, step by step, we need to do something completely different. And you already mentioned flexibility and job security, and it's great to marry these two, because it's important. But what we are seeing is that even more stuff is coming up, right? I mean, we all see that younger generations are entering the workforce, so you have a broad mix. And at SAP, for example, by the year 2025, we have basically 85% of our workforce coming from the digital native camp. And these are folks who have started to live their life in a completely different setting. And they are looking for purpose, and they're looking for belonging, and that purpose is probably more important than ever, in terms of it's not sufficient to offer a great comp and ben package and offer flexibility and security. It's also about the purpose. And this, even in an ideal world, probably backed up by sustainability. I think this is what we're seeing big time these days. All of this needs to be put together and then put into your company context. And this is something where we feel you can make a difference. And I can only encourage everyone who's currently looking at this to do the same, because we feel if you don't do this now, then probably you're really missing the train. I mean, the great resignation needs to be put forward into kind of great opportunities. And the enablement of dreams, which I really, really like as a saying, I mean, this is, of course, also backed up by a value proposition. And maybe one point which I don't want to forget to mention is this should not happen in an ivory tower. So, for example, right now we are trying to really continuously listening also to our folks at SAP across the globe, with 100,000 people work in different countries and locations and geographies, because only if we know what they think, we can get it right. Only if we know what we can get it right. And only if we know how to put this forward into value proposition, we can get it right. And therefore, I feel once again, maybe the link to what you mentioned, Kate, right? The data-driven HR can also help us big time here now with the softer elements, if you will, to make sure everything fits together.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Right, Christian. So you're saying that data-driven HR is also about employee listening and sentiment and really understanding those persona groups. But this is the second time you've mentioned about making sure that your HR processes and policies are not in an ivory tower, but weaved into the fabric of the organization, just like you were saying around strategic workforce planning, which I think was once off to the side. Now it needs to be intimately linked with our business planning if it's going to inform and influence decision making. I would love to go on to skills. I know that we've had many conversations in the past about skills, and maybe Tesari, I could come to you on this one, because when we look at what employees are asking for and how that value proposition has evolved, you know, it's sort of evolved from the loyalty contract to the engagement contract. It's now more about the Thrive contract. We think in the future it's going to be about the lifestyle contract. But a big part of the future is absolutely going to be keep me marketable and make sure that I'm building the skills that are going to pay off for the organization in terms of closing the skills gap, but also help me to get those opportunities inside the organization at Unilever or wherever. I wonder if you could share your thoughts around how that skills and learning agenda is evolving, any bright spots, any learnings?
So to Paddy or to me? Because you mentioned
to you.
To me,
you were
okay.
saying that you might have
Yes.
talent that go to Unilever. So I was sort of saying, how are you preparing them for your jobs in the future and his?
Yeah, I got slightly confused. It looked like Paddy was going to say something. Yeah, no, I mean, we have actually put things front and center as it relates to skills. And I think we took some time to build a framework across the organization to create a common understanding. And I think all of us who work in large corporations know it's very easy to lose sight of what we're doing. You know, like every single function and every single team will go ahead and do something different, and which builds a huge cluster of things that employees are having to face. And I think we started with simplicity. And so we said, let's step back and say, in line with our growth strategy, we are evolving ourselves to be a much more networked organization, less about hierarchy. But what are those skills that are very important to Coca-Cola at this point of time? And we did a piece of work and we prioritized our top 3. This is not to say that the top 3 are the only ones that matter, but we wanted to bring focus, because I think my colleagues here will agree that, you know, you can't build skills by attending a training program for 2 hours, you know, so it requires a lot of investment. And also the other fallacy is that you'll get skills by only attending a training program. So I think we wanted to just bring that focus, and we have actually helped do that and focus the entire organization on the 3 enterprise skills that matter, which also helped us land the message that whether you're in finance or in HR or in technical or in supply chain, you still need to be digitally savvy. You need to have data literacy. You need to have the ability to manage change differently. And so these are the skills that we are focused on. So we are doing that across the organization. One of our learnings was that we said, okay, this is our agenda for year 1. We'll evolve that in year 2. We are realizing it takes more time. So that's also a very good learning for us. And we are actually helping bring all of the functions in. So for example, if you are in marketing and storytelling is one of those skills, their marketing is actually building it for the whole enterprise versus public affairs and communications going and doing it separately, etc. So we've actually helped network the whole organization together and talk about skills and capabilities. But what we are also doing is we are not overcomplicating it. And so we are not getting into the, defining skills and proficiencies and kind of hard coding it, because we are also recognizing, back to the pandemic, the world is very dynamic. It's going to change before we know it. And we are also recognizing that building those skills and building a learning organization is training, and learning is a part of that. But your culture, the artifacts that you have, and all of the things that you dismantle are also important. And so that's the way we are approaching it. And of course, we are doing all the other things that I'm sure other organizations are doing, which is enabling that in our ERP, in implementing talent marketplace, like all of those kind of things, which I'm sure both Christian and Paddy are also implementing in their respective orgs.
I love your comments there, that it's not about hard coding the skills of the future or being precise, because that's heavy lifting and also it is changing, but as much about a philosophy and a culture.
Yes.
Learning and development. I think that's really important. To your point about, I think everybody's embracing talent marketplace. I actually think building skills-based organizations is still in its infancy, even with large organizations. Everybody is on that journey and is recognizing it's more than just upskilling and reskilling, and it does take a philosophical shift. Paddy, I don't know if you did want to come in. Was there any comments you wanted to add on how at Unilever you're thinking about that skills-fueled organization?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm always impressed by Tapaswi and team in terms of their curiosity and all that, so they've often reached out to us and we've had some great dialogues around how to do this thing. And I think that's still, as you mentioned, none of us have really cracked this. at the core of it, though, is being curious, learning from one another, seeing what's out there, and then iterating and learning ourselves, actually. So yeah, I agree. No one's cracked the skills-based organization. We certainly haven't done that. We're trying. As Christian says, it relies on getting more data-driven, using that to help people make great decisions. I think one of the things we've learned, and again, I guess I'm a technology advocate. I know there's a dark side to technology, but when we use it well, it can help us. And I think one of the things we found is that, for example, women tend to underrepresent their skills in our organization. So we've learned this. And so when we can help by auto-populating people's skills based on their jobs and roles, it tends to show more skills than they would have necessarily put forward themselves. So I think one of the things around becoming a skills-based organization is, as Christian has said, finding the right data to use that then helps you make the right informed decisions that help people on their careers, but also help from a recognition perspective. How do we enable ourselves to recognize that skill development, even reward it at some point in the right way? These are all the things we need to start figuring out. And we can start to now with the right data.
I totally agree with you. I think now that we're able to identify what skills you have in the organization, what skills that you need, how we can move people around on skills for development and learning purposes, or even match people with mentors around skills. I think it is making a huge difference. And we've certainly seen the big uptick on that. Your point about gender is fascinating, because we also found that in our global talent trend study. We found that female employees were not only less likely to recognize what skills they have today, and I think AI is definitely playing a big part in that, but they also felt that they were less likely than their male peers to be able to do a job that they had never considered before. So those non-traditional roles, they were less likely to say, my skill set will enable me to do that. So I do think as we start to embrace technology, we need to watch out for some of those biases that humans have. The other thing that worries me when I look at some of the data this year is just exhaustion levels. So we've had some really great ideas and initiatives through the dialogue today, but when we've got energy levels at the lowest rate I've ever seen them, we've got people talking about burnout, we've got 82% executives quite an aggressive tech adoption plan this year. It does make me sort of step back and say, wow, how do we get that right? And Christian, I know you've been thinking a little bit about how do we get the right balance between tech and touch in our HR functions, and how do we make sure that we don't deplete energy as we drive some of these future work initiatives? I wonder if you want to say a few words around your learnings on that front.
Absolutely. And number one, as you say, right, there are indeed right now quite a few factors coming into play where we need to be very careful and cautious about. In particular now when driving also things towards hybrid work and somewhat more remote work, and people coming out of the pandemic and all these other stress factors coming into the equation now here with the Ukraine situation, etc. This is not an easy time. I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think that's probably the starting point. And then I feel also as employers, going even beyond HR per se, I feel it's an obligation to take care of our people. And this means also that the whole topic of health, safety, and well-being becomes more and more important. And this is certainly also even an action item or call to action for all of us to make sure that we have the right settings in place in our companies, that this topic is on top of the agenda, that we have the right teams or functions in place that can manage that we can listen to our people and also understand what needs to be done. And we have also started to work even with explicit trainings, whether it's, for example, health and well-being trainings or mindfulness trainings. All of these things can also help systematically to more or less make your workforce more resilient, which is probably, I think, a key point. But I feel it's, sorry, Kate?
No, sorry, carry on.
And I think, yeah, more or less extending this train of thought now, maybe also to us in HR, when we try to support the overall organization and getting the future of work right. This is also then a call to action for us in HR, because in the past, we all know, right? I mean, we have tried to put more technology into the whole system, which is good, but there needs to be a strategy behind it. I think as we speak, we are seeing lots of tech opportunities, and that's great, but we need to have that kind of master plan probably also for HR over the next couple of years. how to leverage tech in the right way. And yes, we are coming from a tech company, therefore I think we are thinking a lot about this. But what we are seeing is with all that stuff that is coming also on the HR agenda, and with limited budgets, we need to leverage technology wisely to standardize and drive automation, so to drive synergies, to free up resources that we can rather than reinvest or leverage elsewhere where there, for example, the value add stuff is coming. And of course, this is important that we get this right, not just from the tech perspective, but also from the skills perspective. So once again, more or less closing the circle and closing the loop to what the other panelists have said. I think at the end of the day, when we want to bring HR to the next level, you also need to have probably not just a talent strategy and a skills strategy for the business, but also maybe a talent strategy for HR itself. And this means becoming more data-driven, becoming more agile, or drive maybe experience management in HR, all of these things. So there's probably exciting stuff coming up.
Christian, you're so true. Not only is the workforce depleted in energy, but HR is depleted. And the top challenge we see from HR is just having too many priorities on their agenda and feeling stretched in many ways. We are rolling into the last 5 minutes of our discussion today, so we've probably only got time for 2 more questions. Tapaswi, you mentioned earlier about the importance of prioritization and how simplification has sort of been driving your agenda. I wonder if you've got any advice you can offer on that point, or this discussion we've just been having about how do you make sure that we roll out technology with a humanistic mindset?
Yeah, before I go there, actually, Paddy said my word was curious, and I think his word is generous. So I do want to acknowledge that. I don't think actually Christian covered it very, very nicely. So I don't have a lot to add there. It's pretty much similar here. What we've been doing actually is focusing on the core. And so when you try to add new technology, let's make sure it's because it brings unique expertise, content, or capabilities. People are fatigued, as Christian said, and sometimes in HR, we tend to overplay our own importance, like employees are just waiting around for one more thing to come from us. And so we've just started to focus on a fewer things, integrating well, and not get really excited by the new and jazzy, but just make sure that there is a unique value proposition. I don't think we even utilize the technology we have fully before we start introducing new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think human adoption always lags that tech adoption. We often gravitate towards the new features of the tech, but we don't get the efficiencies because we haven't let go of the past. And data. A lot of that.
And data. I mean, if you really want good data, if you have a clutter with technology, that's going to be a clutter with data. And I think that's really, really important. So like Christian said, we need to have a strategy and need to make sure that the data we get out of all of that employee use is available to us to get us insights.
Absolutely. When I had a stat the other day that when people have put 20 new technologies on in a year and the burden has been heaviest on leaders, I think we also have to have a look at who is our customers in HR and how is some of that tech really enabling them to work today. Yes. Gosh, lots to tackle. Paddy, I might come to you for our final question. You've been very active on the Good Work framework that came out, the Good Work Alliance from the World Economic Forum was released at Davos. That talks about 5 standards for the new future of work: fair pay and social integration, flexibility and protection, health and well-being, DEI, employability and learning culture. I think we've touched on all of them, but I'd be curious to know, is there one of these agendas that you see at Unilever as being absolutely critical to make progress on this year?
Terrible question, Kate, making me prioritize between all these important initiatives. I'm going to swerve it a little bit by saying actually the integration between them is probably what we're focusing in on. You can't have equity, diversity and inclusion if people are not able to adequately represent their skills in the organization. Likewise, people aren't going to be upskilling themselves if they're not feeling healthy and well. So it's quite hard. In fact, we probably want to break down the silos between these areas because they're kind of artificial areas and really go human-centric. How are we helping our people to thrive in this organization across those various metrics, because we need all of them to be firing for people to really bring all they can to the organization. So I'm going to swerve it a little bit and say that integration is what we're going after in Unilever.
Well, having heard this dialogue today and about all the things that potentially could be on our agenda, and the reality of being honest, transparent, and offering lots of flexible options, I think I'm going to agree with you. You know, if we want to really figure out how to earn, learn, and laugh together, we need to make progress on a number of them at the same time. But looking at the impact on the organization is absolutely critical. Well, we are at time. I'm going to say a huge thank you, Christian, Tafazwi, Paddy, for sharing all your insights and wisdom. You know, some of the big takeaways for me has absolutely about enabling people to fulfill their dreams. I think that's a lovely concept. Making sure we build our strategic workforce planning and our people sustainability initiatives into the fabric of the organization, how we do business planning and budgeting, making sure that we do prioritize and simplify and don't take the work that HR does as too important when there is a business out there that we need to make progress on. And also maybe recognize that HR is role modeling the future of work. So we also need to be data driven in how we operate digitally first and make sure that we're embracing some of those new consulting skills that Christian talked about. Wonderful discussion. I know we can continue to talk all day. And listeners, thank you so much for taking a bit of time out to join us and tune into our dialogue. If you're keen to learn more about global talent trends, please do visit the mercer.com website and you can download your personal copy. You'll also find links to some of the articles that we mentioned today and books. We mentioned Work Without Jobs from Ravindra Sutherson and John Boudreau. We mentioned the Good Work Framework released by the World Economic Forum. You'll fill links to that. And there's also a podcast with Unilever on the UWorks program under the New Shape of Work series. So please do go there if you're interested to learn more and keep up the dialogue. Paddy, I'm going to end up with a quote with you. There is so much innovation and ideas happening that we've really got to keep up the experimentation. But as we keep up that experimentation, listening, learning, and sharing is absolutely going to be key. Thank you again for joining us today and sharing your vision for new and brighter future of work. Everyone have a great rest of day and wonderful to have this dialogue.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great to have you.